Greetings. Welcome to CIBER Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Ryan Craven, and our guest today is Megan Wade. Megan is a cybersecurity professional working for Ernst and Young. She currently works in information protection and application security. She's also a ransomware research affiliate at the Austrian Workshop for Cybersecurity and Internet Governance at Indiana University. Megan pioneered the first ransomware negotiation strategy titled Digital Hostages, Leveraging Ransomware Attacks in Cyberspace. Today, she's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the cybersecurity implications of the Russian and Ukraine war and some of the things that we can do as individuals to prevent our own cybersecurity attacks. Megan, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. I'm excited to speak to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of a lot going on. Can you tell us a little bit about the current atmosphere in cybersecurity and kind of what's happening on the global scale currently?
Right. So what we've been seeing for, the past couple of years is cyber attacks and digital extortion is like continually being amplified in today's arena. So it's safe to say this might truly be the new norm for not only the United States, but also for foreign governments. So like currently we've been seeing some devastating cyber attacks on Costa Rica's government, and they've effectively, declared a state of emergency, largely thanks to Hive and Conti, which are, two ransomware gangs, which are extorting the government. So combined, they have impacted nearly like 30 government entities in Costa Rica, and I believe Hive has just doubled their ransom payout demand from $10 million to $20 million. So a lot's going on with ransomware globally. So Conti is one of the FBI's top 3 variants and one of the most prolific hacking groups. And Hive is utilizing ransomware as a service. So these are both 2 ransomware groups that are based out of Russia. So.
Gotcha. And when you say based out of Russia, is that it's kind of that gray area, right? Of are they state sponsored or are they not? And, nobody's really going to admit to anything, right?
Right. And so far, we're unclear if they're state-sponsored hacking groups or not. But what we are seeing is that Hive is actually helping Conti rebrand in order to evade like international sanctions, targeting extortion payouts to cyber criminals operating in Russia. But in fact, it's suggested that over 70% of all the money made through ransomware attacks in the last year went to Russian-linked hackers.
Interesting. And for me, it's kind of growing up in, the advent of hacking and, when it was sensationalized and stuff. Seeing the trend shifting from hacking as eventually like trying to get in and steal money versus now it's, like I said, holding infrastructure systems and companies' information ransom. And if you want access to it, you have to pay us.
Right.
Wow. That's fascinating. And so kind of obviously Russia is a huge and ongoing topic currently in kind of, can you speak a little bit to kind of what's currently happening in Russia, particularly in, again, the cybersecurity sphere and, kind of the relations to Ukraine during the war?
Right. So we just had Tom Burt of Microsoft come out and also describe this as being the very first hybrid war. Ukraine has been saying that since February as well. So what this is really meaning is, like, what does this mean? A hybrid war? We're seeing coordinated attacks, both on the ground with Russian troops and then tactically distributed cyber attacks on correlated businesses, infrastructure, communications, sort of together, orchestrated. And it's really the first hybrid war of its kind. And with that, there have been many different types of wiper malware variants, which have been distributed and used to try to obliterate computer networks within the Ukrainian government. I think since the start of 2022, there's been at least 6. and with just the sole purpose of causing damage and destruction, wiping out data, and denying, Ukrainian citizens access to public services, and overall trying to destabilize the country. So you're also seeing, retaliatory attacks. Microsoft came out as saying this this last week. They're expanding attacks in retaliation of those who are providing military assistance to Ukraine as well. So what happened at sort of the beginning of this war, we had this attack on Viasat, which is a high-speed satellite provider whose modems, I believe it was targeted for Ukraine, but it knocked out modems also in Europe. And that was a new type of wiper attack. It's titled Acid Rain. So it exploited vulnerabilities, in these critical communications that, Ukrainian troops were relying on. And it really sort of begged the question, there are vulnerabilities that, we're not quite aware of. And, it sort of launched this sort of high alert for the globe on cyber attacks. Yeah.
Wow. So kind of following up with that a little bit, like I said, this is kind of the new iteration of that hybrid war, and we're getting to see this happen in real time. And like I said, it's not just the attacks aren't just focusing on strictly military technology or military targets. It's also impacting infrastructure and just communications in general. And as you said, trying to limit access to public services, which causes a whole nother level of strain on a population already going through a challenging time.
Right. And I think what's very interesting is you have sort of this intersection of like private companies like Microsoft, and then you have this international conflict, and then you have even just hacktivists. So there's kind of this like back and forth between, hacktivists, cyber espionage, and just it's a very interesting environment in which we're seeing play out. So, we have like the IT army, which is in support of Ukraine, who are like also hitting Russia with, DDoS attacks and custom malware. And so truly this is a different type of war that, people are hearing what's happening on the ground, but what's happening in digital space, people aren't as familiar, but there's also an incredible shift in the way this is being led tactically.
That's super fascinating. And I know you mentioned, DDoS and IT Army a little bit, and kind of following that up with, historically Russia has targeted Ukraine even prior to this, right, in the cyberspace. Right. How are those kind of past attacks relevant and kind of lead us to some of the stuff we're seeing today?
Right. So, this cyber Ukrainian Russian war, like cyber warfare, has been ongoing, I would say, since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So what I'm going to talk about is like two notable attacks, which happened, one in 2015 and then one in 2017. So in 2015, the Ukrainian power grid was attacked by Sandworm, which is an advanced persistent threat group, which is in correlation with the Russian government. And so interestingly enough, the name Sandworm comes from, the malware references in the code, which are actually Dune references, believe it or not. But this resulted in power outages of over, 200,000 customers. And it all began from a spear phishing email with black energy malware. So then one of the most devastating cyber attacks in history, still to this day, happened in 2017, also distributed by Sandworm, and it was called NotPetya. And so what was particularly fascinating about NotPetya was it was propelled by two powerful hacker exploits. together. So we had this penetration tool known as Eternal Blue, which was a US NSA developed hacking tool, which worked on Windows protocols to perform remote execution. So you could essentially get onto the computer remotely and execute malicious code. So that was known as, a 0-day, which are some of the most dangerous, and also prolific with so essentially with 0 days, it's a software vulnerability. It's unknown to anyone who can even mitigate it yet. And so it opens like a window of an attack vector for any sort of malicious actor. And so with Eternal Blue, it was a 0-day exploit. But what was so interesting about NotPetya was that Microsoft had already deployed a patch for Eternal Blue at this point in time, but because it was combined with Mimikatz, hackers could still get access and to patched computers and pull passwords out of RAM. So essentially it could hopscotch from one machine to the next, from computers that weren't patched to computers that were patched. And so like NotPetya got its name from an earlier malware variant called Petya, where it extorts victims for ransom. However, with NotPetya, the ransom message was just, smoke and mirrors. It was just instead completely irreversible on the master boot record. And within hours, the worm went across the world, hitting, multinational companies and doing upwards of $10 billion in damage.
Yeah, not a small blip on the global radar by any step of the imagination.
Right. And then, in Ukraine, when it was hit, it hit airports, it hit banks, hospitals, ATMs. And so it essentially like crippled entire parts of the country during that attack.
Right. It's I think the fascinating thing for me, when we were talking about cybersecurity and the potential impacts, is just how much we potentially take for granted. It works and we expect it to work, and don't necessarily understand, especially me being, a layman, all of the things and factors that go in behind the scenes to ensure that, things do the things that they are supposed to do.
Right.
And you mentioned, Microsoft enabled that patch, and we did talk about this a ton, but I'd just be kind of curious as your input or explanation on, how much collaboration is there between, some of the security agencies, developing some of these hacks and some of these systems, and like a private business like Microsoft, right? Where it's kind of this defense, but also, everybody uses Windows for the most part in general, right? And so having access, but development and trade, I don't say trade secrets, but that's the best terminology I guess I have. How well do, I guess the private companies and, the government agencies working on the security side kind of communicate?
Right. I think in some sense of the matter, there has been tensions in the past, right? Because we had the NSA who didn't alert Microsoft to like the Eternal Blue 0-day, because we wanted that in our cyber arsenal, to
utilize.
Yeah, to utilize. And so there's definitely been a very interesting relationship, I would say, between private companies and the government. And there's been really a shift lately to kind of open up more transparency between the two. Microsoft helping the government helping, they're publishing like IOCs regularly. So like CISA has like a reporting mechanism where if you see any sort of suspicious activity on your network, you can go in and report it. And, it helps with the overall security posture of the nation, really this sort of collaboration. But of course, there are sort of these historical tensions between, what is shared, what isn't shared, and of course the complex argument of, being like a cyber power of the US and having those exploit tools in order to, secure the United States in a cyber world.
Perfect. Well, I know we're going to talk again here in a little bit about what some of that implications all mean for kind of us as individuals and companies, and what we should potentially be aware of, and kind of the things that are happening to help prevent some of this stuff. So thanks for the initial conversation, Megan, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Ryan.
That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. For future topics or suggestions, please drop us a line at cyber@indiana.edu.